we all kind of get in our heads and talk ourselves out of great ideas all the time. And if you can just get in that execution mindset where you're doing more and you're focused on, okay, what can I get done today? Then you'll find that you oftentimes will do more than you ever expected.
Designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and I'm joined today by Alyssa Hellman from North Carolina. Alyssa, say hi to our podcast audience.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome for being a part of the show. I'm just honored that you're here, and I'm sure that we're going to dispense some wisdom, as I like to say. It'll be great. So you hail from North Carolina in a town called Clayton, which is just in the Raleigh area. And I know that you are good buddies with one of our former podcast guests, Stephanie Lanier. I'd love to just dive in real quick on how you and Stephanie know each other. You and I have had an experience of meeting together in person at our 30 Under 30 reunion back in 2015, which you were a part of that class, the 30 Under 30 class in 2015. So how do you know Stephanie? And also let's talk a little bit about time management as well as fear and how you kind of work through some of your coaching clients with getting fear out of their life.
Yeah. So Stephanie and I have known each other probably about 3-4 years now. We met through somebody that most of your audience probably knows, Zach Shabbat, and formerly from Go Realty. Now he's with Zillow Group. And kind of the moment that I met Stephanie, we were fast friends. She has so much value to share, as all of you guys know from listening to her episode. And we share so many kind of common principles about how we lead our lives, how we approach our businesses, and just kind of day-to-day life, that it was just an immediate friendship, and something that I truly value. She, to this day, is somebody that I call for advice on just about anything. But in terms of fear, your question about fear, Kyle, I think it's one of those things that, you know, in this business right now, we're in a really hot market in most markets nationally. And I think most successful real estate agents that have been in the market for longer than, you know, a year or two understand that we are in that hot market, and you can get a little lazy and you can kind of stray from the things that built you the success that you're now experiencing. But what a lot of people kind of forget, and some are starting to realize more and more, and this is where I'm dealing with a lot of that fear, is, you know, in 12, 18, 20, maybe even 24 months, I think it'll probably happen before that, you're going to start to see the market soften. And you might even start to see the market depress, and people will really have to get back to basics. I think the thing to consider is, you know, if you're in a really hot market that has no inventory, even if you get back to a balanced market where you're back at 6 months of inventory, which for the record is a balanced market, it's going to feel depressed from where you are right now. And I think that's really the kind of thing that is so important to understand. And it's so important to be able to articulate that to your clients and your prospects as well, because to the average consumer, when you go back to that balanced feeling and they're not seeing, you know, signs go in the ground and come out of the ground as quickly as they are now, they might start to have their own fear. And so we're not only dealing with getting back to basics in terms of the individuals and clients I'm working with, we're dealing with how are you going to articulate that to your clientele too.
So some of the things that we talk about as it relates to fear are, you know, fear of things not being the way that you expect them to be, right? You know, you become accustomed to something, and I think it really ends up becoming a discussion about perspective, right? And I think that most people, if you've been in the real estate industry for just a few years, your perspective is skewed towards this existing market. Whether it's fortunate or not, I got started in the real estate industry back in 2004. So I'm going on 15 years now of real estate experience. And those markets are going to change. And at the same time, I'm actually really excited about that. And people might kind of like tilt their head like a golden retriever and say like, why would you be excited about that? But as a real estate professional, you have the opportunity to make money in any market. Your job is to find the market, right? And I think that it's important to share with our audience that you've been a successful realtor and you're now a successful coach. You and your wife, Lynn, both are in the real estate industry. You know, Lynn is a professional realtor and is going out there and doing sales and works with Be Home Realty. And then your company, Compass South, helps realtors across the nation really just work through some of these problems. And a lot of it's fear, a lot of it's time management. So as you think about perspective, what do you do to really intervene with someone that may be kind of feeling stuck? They feel like, okay, it's the beginning of the year and maybe I didn't hit the big goals that I had, or I hit some goals, but you know, now I'm trying to stretch into those things. What are some of the things you're doing with your coaching clients today that help you really get them past maybe some of these limiting beliefs that they might have?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned perspective, Kyle, and I think that is key to being successful in any industry, any area of your life is you have to have that perspective. And I always joke, I read on Facebook actually last night, somebody said, you know, I think January is the worst month to start the year. It's cold, it's dark, the days seem shorter. Like, I'm going to start my 2019 in June. That seems better. And it made me laugh, not only because it's funny, but because really you can do that. You can start your year whenever you decide you want to start your year. You know, there's that old saying of today is the first day of the rest of your life. You just have to make the decision to make the change and do the actions that will cause the results. And so I think that's really key when I talk to any of my clients. In terms of perspective, I started in real estate back in 2008, which most people would tilt their head when I say 2008. And I got licensed in 2010, but as much as that was a crazy thing to do, and I was convinced I was going to make all this money, and then I started in real estate, so I don't know what I was thinking, but it was one of those things that it gave me the perspective to do what I do now. Like, I understand what hard work is. I understand that you're going to have to stay on the phone with people and make the calls when it's an uncomfortable conversation. I had a lot of those really uncomfortable conversations about people losing a whole lot of money when they were selling their houses as some of my first listing conversations. So, you know, the conversations that a lot of us are having now where, you know, you're telling people how much money they're going to make and they're upsizing and, you know, buying vacation homes and things like that. Like, that's great. And those are conversations that you want to have, but it's much more difficult to have the tough conversations. So being able to prepare and say, look, I'm educated, I'm prepared, I'm confident, no matter what I have to tell my clients and prospects, that's a different starting point. So that's what kind of gives you the perspective of, look, I should be sharing this news with joy. I should be having these conversations with a new energy. And that's really what I do with my clients is I'm building in that confidence. I'm building in that energy. And most of all, we're building habits so that they can live what I call lives that thrive. And I think that is really key no matter what industry you're in.
Well, I love the topic of habits. So I'm reading the book High Performance Habits by Brendon Burchard right now, and I'm about 70 pages in, and just love the content, love some interviews I've heard of Brendon. And I was originally recommended to Brendon or referred to Brendon by a good friend of ours, Brandon Green from Washington, D.C. And so performance habits, I think, are really critical in real estate. And Brendon, at least in some of his interviews and in the book, he talks about there's a couple of different types of habits. There are these homeostasis habits, which are just kind of naturally what's comfortable to you. And those are not really the type of habits he talks about. These are habits that you constantly have to remind yourself that are necessary. And so what are some of the habits that you dig into with your coaching clients to really get them, you know, especially as it relates to time management, but also to get them over their fears? What are some things that you find yourself constantly talking to your clients about that might help our audience today?
Yeah, so I love that book, by the way. And it's a fantastic.
Don't spoil it for me. All right?
I won't, but I am going to pull from it for this first point because I think it's I had to reread this section multiple times before I understood it. And he talks about raising necessity. And I hope you're at that part, by the way. But when you raise necessity, I didn't really understand what he meant at first. But the idea of raising necessity, because my thought is necessity is just something that's created. It's just there, and then you have to respond to necessity versus how can you raise it? How can you create it yourself? And that's something that high performers are doing more than anybody else. And by raising necessity, what he means is they're saying it is a necessity that I perform. It is a necessity that I do the things that are important to move the needle. And those are the things that are so easy. Like if your goal is to lose 25 pounds this year, it needs to become a necessity to eat healthy, to work out, to do these things each and every day. Because the example that he uses, I can't recall if it's in this book or not, but the example that he uses is it creates incremental change. Like you're not going to say, I want to lose 25 pounds. And by the end of January, you've lost 25 pounds. Like if you're lucky, you've lost, 5-10 pounds or something like that. And so the idea is it's repeated action. And that's something that we work with our clients on all the time is habits are really hard to build. They're even harder to break. And so a lot of our clients come to us with some bad habits that they've created over time. And you and I have discussed kind of offline in the past that, one of the things that we really wanted to do at Compass South when we launched the company was make coaching more accessible. And part of the reason why I believe so strongly in making coaching more accessible is it allows you to create really great habits from the start. And so that way, when people are coming to coaches, they're not coming saying, I have all these bad habits. I wake up late. I struggle to make my calls. I struggle to do all of these things. We're saying, look, tell us where you want to go, and then let's chart the path to get there. And I think that is really the difference maker that, you look at most new agents or most newbies in really any industry, but especially in real estate, the level of support isn't there. The level of teaching really isn't there. A lot of the training is focused on, we assume that you know how to run a business. We assume that you know how to generate business. So this is how to run a transaction. The running of the transaction is the easy part. It's the building of the business that's the tough part. That's the stuff that takes the day in, day out commitment. And it takes you have to raise necessity. The other habit that I think is really important is this idea of generating energy. And so I'm big on generating energy because I'm big on my mornings. So everybody, probably mostly because of these cell phones, everybody these days is feeling starved for time. And if you're anything like me, the moment that your kids walk through the door or your husband or wife or significant other, or even dogs, you pick up the dogs from daycare, the moment that like the outside world starts to be inside your world, you lose complete control. And that's something that's never going to change. Like my kids are always going to come home from school. They're always going to want my attention, and that's okay. And I want to be able to give it to them. But the key when I talk about my mornings is I have to be more structured. I know that in order to give my best self to them, in order to give my best self to my clients, I have to really prioritize myself in the mornings. So I wake up at 5:30 every morning, which honestly, there's people that wake up a whole lot earlier than I do. And I wake up at 5:30, and I oftentimes will say I accomplish more between 5:30 and 7:30 in the morning before anyone else in my house is really up and moving around than a lot of people do all day. And part of that is I'm able to really focus on what's moving that needle forward. What are these important tasks, but not urgent tasks? And kind of the difference there is an important task is going to be something that moves that needle forward, but nobody's going to ask me about. So nobody's going to ask me if I made my calls. Nobody's going to ask me if I've generated business that day. But if I have an appointment later today, like if I have this appointment with you today, if I don't show up, like I'm going to show up to that whether I'm starved for time or not. I'm not going to make my calls whether or not I'm starved for time. And those are the things that really change. And that's where, kind of circling back to raising necessity, that's where you have to say, no, I'm going to make my calls whether I'm starved for time or not. And these are all the ways I'm going to structure my day so that I'm not starved for time.
Oh, I love all of that. Raising necessity. So this is interesting. One of the things I've learned from a couple of different sources, but anything that you want to have important in your life, you should screenshot it and make it your wallpaper on your phone, right? And so I just took the Brendan Bouchard, the assessment that he recommends after reading the first chapter. And so I've got my first 3 scores. And for those of you who haven't read the book, you've got clarity, energy, and necessity are the first 3 categories and the first 3 main chapters of the book. So I'm in clarity right now, which clarity is kind of one of my weak spots. It's still higher than a lot of people, but I didn't score quite 4. I was 3.67 out of 5. Energy is one of those that I was 4 out of 5, and so is necessity. And so necessity and energy have really never been hard for me. And probably it comes from a place of how I grew up. You know, I'm the oldest of 6 kids. Resources were scarce. I mean, it's not like we grew up poor. We grew up middle class, but you know, if you wanted to eat, the joke was around all my friends in high school is it was kind of like, you know, you had to really eat quickly to get your next tables. I had a couple of buddies that said, hey, it's like, you know, it's like an orphanage here. You're like, you guys, you got to eat pretty quick because the food's going to run out. And they didn't have that happening when they were growing up. And so for necessity, on my cell phone right now, and I just thought I would read this because it's right from the book and it's right from the assessment. It says that this measures your level of emotional commitment you feel to showing up each day at your best. It's your level of must in improving your life and serving others with excellence. If you haven't felt as driven or motivated as you want, this is a great area to focus on. Start with asking yourself every day at work, who needs me on my A game right now? Really connect with who you are working for. Sometimes we'll do more for others than ourselves, right? And so that chapter is the psychology of a sense of urgency. And sense of urgency for me has always been like, hey, look, I have to create this. I have to will this into existence. And I think top performers, that's one of the things that they're very keyed in on. Energy, loved how you talked about energy because there are certain days where we have things that just naturally happen that sap our energy, right? And then this concept, I never really heard it this way before, but that you actually create your own energy. And you can create your own energy by doing things that are positive, like drinking water, getting enough sleep. Stephanie Lanier on episode 53, if you haven't heard that, talks about some of the best things in life are stretching, you know, sweating because you're working out, sleeping. Those things are all free. And people, I think when you're feeling ragged and you're feeling like you have no margin in your life and you feel like you are just totally overwhelmed, a lot of it is because you are not thinking about those things, which is these self-care elements. So love that those are some things that you think about and really dive into with your coaching clients.
Yeah, I think, so I actually use I use the 5-second journal by Mel Robbins every morning. If you haven't heard from it, Brendan Bouchard also does a high performance planner. His is really in depth and scientific. So like you have to be motivated to fill his out every morning. And I struggled with that a little bit, admittedly, but hers is much more condensed. And one of my favorite parts about this planner is the first thing I do every single morning is she's got a little gas tank icon kind of on the page. And you have to be honest about how you feel. And the options are energized, good, fine, meh, or depleted. And then you define 3 reasons why you feel that way. And then you, after that, say, to feel more energized, I can do these things. And oftentimes my answer is the same. So even if I feel energized, like what could I do to feel more energized? I could get my workout in, I could hydrate, I could, you know, spend some time with the kids this morning. I can get this big project off my desk. All of those things will give me more energy and more sense of accomplishment. But I love that. I think so often we are focused on the tasks that we need to accomplish versus the energy of who we are. And this is actually something where Stephanie and I feel very similar on. Stephanie always says you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's so very true. So often, especially in real estate, really any sales industry, but especially in real estate, we will deplete ourselves so much, our health, our wellness, our mindset, and give so much to others. And the reality is that's how you burn out. That's how you won't be able to do all of these things. And so I love having kind of this mental check-in with myself. And I find myself doing it throughout the day of if I feel bad, I'm kind of like, why do I feel this way? What can I do to get out of this mindset? And I'll take kind of what I call brain breaks throughout the day to sort of build that energy back into myself, and accomplish more important tasks. And I think that's something that we so often miss. Kind of circling back to the idea of raising necessity, it's really important to stay in touch. Like, I love what you're doing, Kyle, because it's so important to stay in touch with why you're doing these things. And oftentimes, what I find really helpful is the idea of moving backward from what result do I want to achieve, and then like all of the things that need to happen in order to do that. And so my result is admittedly slightly selfish. Like, I like to take vacations. I like to travel with my kids. I like to spend time not working with them. But the way that I do that is by being really focused at work. It's by delivering. Now, another one of the things that I like to do is I sort of had this aha moment in real estate where I was like, wow, I can be so productive. I can accomplish so much more than I ever thought I could just by doing these small tweaks. That's another one of my huge whys of I love to help people kind of have those aha moments, because I remember what it felt like when I did. And bringing myself back to that, I know how much my clients need me. I know how much the people that I haven't even spoke to yet need to work with me. And I know how much my kids need me. And that all becomes necessity. And that was something I really struggled with, especially when reading that book, but in general, of how do I create like just wanting to do it? And so often people will talk about, start with your why, define your why, but then what do you do with it? And that's the everyday building back into the why of I've got to be here. I've got to be on my A game. I've got to show up. I've got to do the tasks that I need to do. And kind of when you work backward, when I say I love vacation, well, I need to make money. I need to have clients, and to make money, I need to have clients. Have clients, I need to make phone calls. I need to spend that prospecting time. And that's where we oftentimes have that disconnect.
Oh, it's perfect. Pure gold. And I've heard a lot about Mel Robbins. I don't know about her specifically, but I think it's really cool that you made the differentiation that Brendan's planner is a bit heady and it's a bit intellectual. And if anyone who's read his content knows that, I mean, he comes like almost like Jim Collins, where it's very like research oriented, and it's digestible. It's not like it's impossible to read, but it's a lot. And so I think it's important. Self-awareness, and my therapist has mentioned this to me, self-awareness is critical for success. And it goes all throughout that book. So I think the fact that you realize that Mel Robbins Planner is a lot more digestible for you, it's more repeatable. I think that's such a key to being successful, because so many people, and it's funny, I heard another good author, John Acuff, interviewed on Jen Hatmaker's podcast the other day, and I've read a bunch of John's books. I love Start, just recently finished Do Over. And he's got a great book called Quitter as well. And John had mentioned that so many people set out to run 3 miles, realize they have the energy or the time to do 2 miles, and therefore they run 0 miles. And how many times have you approached something where you're like, you know what, I have to make 10 prospecting calls, or I've got to do a pop by, I've got to, do this or whatever. And all of a sudden you realize, I only have time for 1 call, so I'm going to make none. And so many of our clients, so many of our people that we interact with, whether it's the brokers that I support and am working with at my company, or just even my own clientele, like you overwhelm yourself with doing things so perfectly that then you just don't do anything. And so one of the things that I've adopted is this mindset of done is better than perfect, and just take one baby step towards your goal. And all of a sudden you'll realize like, hey, I may have only made 1 call today, but it's 1 more call that I didn't make yesterday or whatever. So those are some things that I really enjoy. So we talked a little bit about Lynn, your spouse, your wife. You and Lynn have an 8-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son, and 2 dogs, and kind of a similar situation to the way that we are at my household. We've got, 3 kiddos, all in elementary school. So I know that that free time is definitely a luxury, and you've got this situation where you're constantly kind of this traffic cop as you're getting kids out of the house and trying to get a workout in and all this other thing. So how do you work through that? How do you fit it all in? And how do you personally, what are some time management things that you implement? You mentioned waking up early, which I think is key, and accomplishing things before people are up. But what are some other things you do to make sure that you get the most important things accomplished?
Yeah, so I'm big on finding a process that works for you. So kind of using your example about the planners, I actually keep both planners. The reason why is sometimes I'll kind of just fall off track and I'll need that like major check-in back, and I'll use that high performance planner, which is so much more in depth. And what that does is it basically just gets me right back on track. And then I go back to my daily planner. And so often what we do is we say, I'm making this commitment. I'm going to run 5 miles a day. And then we miss a day because we're tired or sore or whatever. And then we completely give up. And my thing is, why would you not find something sustainable? If you run a mile every day, if you get on a bike for 15 minutes every day, it's better than the 0 that you're not doing. I have a good friend that is doing more video in real estate. And she often says, my imperfect videos are crushing the videos that you're not putting out there. And I love that saying because it's so very true of, look, like you've got to get into that execution mindset. And I'm big, that's part of why I'm a big fan of Mel Robbins is I think so many of us get stuck in that analysis paralysis of I'm getting ready to get ready to get ready to get ready. And the problem is she doesn't have time for that. Her process is quite literally the 5-second rule. She counts down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and just does it. And her feeling is when you get in that state of execution, you can tweak things all the time. Yes, you'll make mistakes, but as long as you're learning from them, that's okay. And you'll get a whole lot more done. And so, I mean, as you talk about in kind of this constant circus of a household that I think we both are probably living in, you know, I bring a lot of my coaching to my parenting too. It's just how I navigate it. Like one of my proud parenting moments was the other day at dinner. You know, my daughter Sunny is trying out for a play and she was really nervous. And my son Rylan said, you've just got to use the 5-second rule. And I was like, oh, you have won me over today. I love that. But his point is so right, is, you know, we all kind of get in our heads and talk ourselves out of great ideas all the time. And if you can just get in that execution mindset where you're doing more and you're focused on, okay, what can I get done today? What little bit can I get done today? Then you'll find that you oftentimes will do more than you ever expected. I oftentimes do this with my exercise routine. So those of you guys that know me or familiar with me know that I'm a pretty avid Peloton rider. And I oftentimes, like, they set up rides in different increments. And sometimes I'm sore and I'm tired and, you know, I'm just not comfortable and I don't want to do a 60 or 45-minute ride. And so I'll say, you know, I'm just going to get on for 15 minutes. Like, that's it. And more often than not, what I'll find is I end up riding for 30 minutes or I end up on a 45-minute ride or multiple 15-minute rides. But it's just the getting there and starting. And I think if we started more things, we'd all be a whole lot more productive.
Oh, I just love that because it's so true. So I don't do Peloton, but I do love to run, and I love to run in our open space that's right near our neighborhood with my dog Boomer. And what I have found, especially, you know, in Colorado, it gets legitimately cold. I mean, it's been 20 to 30 degrees for the past couple of days here, and it stays sunny. It's sunny today, but what happens is it's really hard to get motivated to run, especially put in some serious miles when it's really, really cold out, and you've got to have special gear. And so I have noticed myself, especially in January, that I'll start on a walk, and after about, you know, call it 3/4 of a mile to a mile, I'm like, to heck with this, like, let's start running. And it's funny, but I think for a long time I underestimated the value of warming up. And I think, you know, if you're going to use the spinning analogy, doing Peloton, like, just that exercise, even if it's in your super, super low gear, there's not a whole lot of tension on that gear. You're just kind of spinning. all of a sudden that action makes you say, okay, I can ratchet it up a little bit. And I think what happens is we just overwhelm ourselves with, it's got to be this like big, intense, like perfect. And it doesn't need to be. It's all about making one little action, one little baby step towards what we want to accomplish. And afterwards, you end up looking back and you're like, hey, I rode for 35 minutes and I really wanted to ride for 5. And it ends up working out. So I think that's awesome. One of the things that I like to talk about is, you just mentioned start and how starting is really important. What motivated you to get started in this industry, and why did you decide to have a career in real estate? And then second follow-up to that is, let's talk about the transition from agent to coach, because I think a lot of high performers really enjoy that interaction. I do as well, as a broker owner, as an employing broker, of working with some of my new guys that are they're looking at me saying, hey, you've done it for 15 years. How can I replicate and build a career in real estate? So let's talk about how you got started, and then also how you made that transition.
Yeah. So, how I got started, it's been a long time at this point, so it feels almost ancient, but I think I must have just been crazy. I was one of those people that was like, I want unlimited income and flexibility and all that stuff. And then I was in real estate for like a half hour and realized that's not what it is. But I think the key for me of why I got started and where I really thought that it was a path that I wanted to go is, I always sort of had this entrepreneurial mindset of, I loved the idea of being my own boss, building something of my own. As after I got started, kind of those of you that have followed my career, it's been at a lot of startups. And part of the reason it's been at a lot of startups is I love that stage of the business. I love kind of the getting started, the digging in, the bootstrapping. I love that. And I think it's so important, and gets lost the more success that we have, is we forget all of the things that we did to really, really hustle hard when we were young and hungry and trying to do these things. In no small part, because our houses become these circuses and we're dealing with so much more stuff. Like, I look back on, 23, 24-year-old me that was starting out in real estate and was thinking, I have no time. And I'm like, you had so much time. Like, you could have been so much more successful and productive and all of those things. Like, why didn't you do all these things? And that's kind of been what's motivated my transition from agent to coach as well, is, as I said earlier, I had this aha moment of, wow, I have figured all of these things out, and every day I find new things that I haven't figured out. And I kind of love that. But I have figured out a lot of stuff, and there's certain things that I am sure of. And I feel like if I can leave the legacy or give the gift to any of my clients or any agents out there where they can be more successful as a result of the lessons that I've learned, I'd love to do that. And that's really kind of my why and my passion behind coaching, is every single day, instead of watching people find a home that they love, now I'm watching people build their own legacy, build their own businesses that, will be left to their families and to the other agents that join their brokerages or teams or whatever it may be. And that to me is super satisfying, because I think in this business, we get so lost in numbers and honorees and accolades and all of those things. And, it's always fun when you're getting them, but there's a lot of moments in between where it's just life. It's the things that you're going home to your wife or husband or kids, and you're talking to them about what you're doing. And, there's the old saying that you never want on your tombstone your transaction count. You want all of the other things that you're doing. And that's what coaching's really allowed me to do. Is I love when I'm talking to clients who not only are building their businesses and upping their production, but they're also telling me how they took a vacation with their family, or they're also telling me how now they're coaching their kids' soccer team, or they've started an animal rescue, or other things outside of the business. Because to me, when I first started, that was something that I really lost. I mean, I became all real estate all the time, and I'm not in the minority there. You get a little taste of success. My guess is you talk to most 30 under 30 honorees. A lot of us don't have a big life when we were getting those accolades because we were all real estate all the time. And if I can help people realize you can build a tremendously successful business and a life that you're really happy and proud of, that to me is reward enough.
Oh man, that is good stuff. And I know that you know it because when you interact with people in a coaching environment, you're really serving them and really trying to get them some clarity and get them unstuck in an area. And then you're seeing that progress, you're seeing that production that you're helping them with. And it's really fulfilling. You know, I know just as a sports coach, as a youth sports coach, I have coached basketball and soccer, and I was a swim coach when I was in my 20s. And one of the things I'm really into now is I coach my son Henry's lacrosse team, and I've done that for 3 years now. And the parents will giggle after the game and come up to me and they're like, man, you were jumping up and down when this kid scored, and like you are like into it. And I'm like, it's super exciting. It's a sport that I love. And to be able to teach kids how to play the game, but also the lessons that are learned by being competitive and striving towards something and working together. It's really cool stuff. So how do people interact with your coaching program, and what does that look like? What does Compass South look like for someone that's feeling like, look, I've heard a bunch about coaching, but I've never really had a coach that I can work with. Maybe someone's thinking that right now. I personally have had some amazing coaches. I've been blessed to be coached by Rory Vaden. I've been blessed to be coached by John Felkins, by Chris Oakley. I mean, I've had some amazing coaches, some of which have been on this podcast. And I will tell you, they have in spots literally saved my life. And I'm not trying to make that sound loftier, bigger, more emotional. I mean, Rory really led me back to my faith, which is really incredible. Chris had led me to where we are today, which is starting Calibrate, which is a startup. So coaching is huge. What does it look like for you at Compass South?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, one of my huge goals when I launched the company was, if I cannot succeed in making coaching more accessible for more agents, I don't have any interest in doing it. So we offer quite a few different kind of levels of coaching. The first is designed to be completely accessible. So we have something called the MCC, or the Monthly Coaching Club, where we do interviews not dissimilar to this, with who I would consider sought after experts in a variety of fields. And we've had sales trainers on there. We've had best-selling authors on there. We've had successful agents, podcast hosts, brokerage owners, all sorts of people. And it has really been a rewarding situation where we're interviewing them. So that is completely free when you attend live. Then if you were to join the Monthly Coaching Club, it's $99 a month, and you get recordings of all of the episodes we've ever recorded. So not just since the point you joined, since forever, which is an amazing value in and of itself. But you're also getting open access to all of our guests. You're getting exclusive member-only downloads and resources. So a lot of them will offer kind of quick tips or assessments or different worksheets that are helpful to you kind of implementing whatever it is that they're talking about. We also do a quarterly mastermind with all those members. So you're really getting a ton of value for that $99. And then beyond that, we also offer individual one-on-one coaching with a variety of team packages, as well as just individual agent one-on-one coaching. But really kind of the design behind all of it was, we want to have something for someone in every stage. Most of our one-on-one coaching clients have come up through the ranks of Compass South. We have many people that, are individual agents and then grow into teams or brokerage owners and then stay with us. They just expand their package. And that's really the design that I wanted when we launched the company is, I'm a relationship business kind of girl. And I think that that's so important to me, to everyone at the company, that's how we wanted to design it. We want to keep clients for life and grow with them, as opposed to saying, okay, now you've outgrown us, you would go here. And we want to get you guys early where I think it's important to be investing in yourself, getting this sort of value. And so doing it at an affordable price point is really actually a difficult thing and not something that I would say most coaches offer.
Yeah, I'll tell you from past experience. I mean, there's a lot of coaching programs out there that are $500 to $1,000 a month, and probably offer similar value in some ways to the coaching program that you have, which I think is awesome. How do people find Compass South? What's a good website for them to go to? And if they're interested in enrolling, what does that process look like?
Sure. So if you just go to whatsyourdirection.com, or if you go to my name, alysahellman.com, it will take you to the same place. And I always do that in case people can't spell it or can't understand. But you can find me there, as well as links to all of our social. I'm AV Hellman on most social. And it is me that runs all of it. And so you will always talk to me. I think that's also something that's way different is I got into this business because I wanted to help people. I don't want to train coaches to coach other people. And so all of our coaching clients work directly with me. And so I would love to talk to you guys more about, coaching or just leading you in the right direction.
Love it. A couple of questions that I ask every guest. So first off, I think a lot of people get bent out of shape. You've probably seen this with some coaching clients, maybe even yourself within your career, when they make mistakes and they feel like they're a failure when things don't go perfectly. So how have you learned as a successful business owner, but also someone that's actually been in the trenches selling real estate? And I know that, your wife, Lynn, obviously is still in the business of selling real estate. What are some things that you've noticed top performers do to get kind of unstuck, get comfortable with failure? How do you kind of think about that management of failure?
So in terms of setbacks, in terms of failure, I think the thing that I tell everybody is it never goes away. It never goes away, and it never hurts any less. You just learn to manage it better. And I think that is something that is uncomfortable for almost everyone to hear, but long term, it's really comfortable to know that. It's comfortable to know that even the most successful agents out there get turned down at listing appointments. They don't get every listing that they go up for. I think that's the key. And so I'm a big fan. I practice, those of you guys that have read The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, he talks about the 5-minute rule. And essentially is this going to matter in 5 minutes? And you also give yourself 5 minutes to feel anything, because one of the worst things that you can do with setbacks or failure is just keep going. You have to give yourself permission to feel, to soak in it, to go through those emotions, because more often than not, if you don't, it's still there. It'll come back at some point, and it'll normally come back at a much less convenient time and really have a negative impact. And so I'm big on feeling whatever you're going through. But Hal Elrod's theory is it going to matter in 5 minutes? Maybe. Is it going to matter in 5 days? Maybe. And is it going to matter in 5 years? And oftentimes the answers are either yes, no, no, or no, yes, yes. And I think that is really the key to understanding. It may feel like a really big failure at that moment. I mean, if you coach kids athletics, you understand they lose a game, like end of the world. Like my daughter, the shirt she doesn't want to wear in the morning, end of the world if it's not there. Literally in 5 minutes, it's going to matter to her. In 5 days, she's going to forget what she wore. In 5 years, it's not going to fit, and she's going to have no idea she even had that shirt probably. And so these things that seem so big in our world at any given moment, oftentimes we just need the perspective to shift a little bit and say, is this really what I should be focused on? And I also use that, just by the way, to convince myself and to help build into habits. And so taking prospecting, for example, is it going to matter in 5 minutes that you didn't call anybody? No. Is it going to matter in 5 days? Maybe. And then 5 years that you're not spending this time prospecting, absolutely it's going to matter. And so I think it's a really good practice to decide what you should be focused on and how to do it.
I love that. We talked about principle of perspective, that idea at the beginning of this interview, and we're coming back to it. My coach, Rory Vaden, wrote a book called Take the Stairs. And in that book, he talks about the principle of perspective and talks about thinking of taking, and for those of you in real estate, you've seen this, you've seen appraisers do this. So they'll take that big old wheel of a ruler, it's like a tape measure ruler. And if you pull that out 80 feet or 90 feet, which is kind of the average lifespan if you think about 80 or 90 years. And if you look at an inch, that's going to represent, 12 inches in a foot. That's going to represent a month of your life. And if you look at how small that is, or even if you look at a year, in the grand scheme of things, that perspective, all of a sudden that visually gives you the idea that, hey, I may have had a crummy year back in 2017 or 2018, but you know what? We're in 2019. Get moving. And I think that that's really important, is that I'm also reminded of the author, John C. Maxwell. I mean, you talk about failing forward, but then he's also got a follow-up book that's called Sometimes You Win and Sometimes You, and the normal idea is lose, but he has lose checked off and crossed off and says sometimes you learn. And I think there's so much learning in failure. One of our prior guests was a guy named Ron Cathell out of McLean, Virginia. And he says, failures are friend. Those who refuse to learn from failures or from stumbling blocks are fools. And I think that there's a lot to be learned in failure. My favorite question, I always leave it to the end. Both of us have eclipsed the 30-year-old mark. I'm a little bit further ahead than you are. I'm approaching 40 a little bit faster than Alyssa is. But Alyssa, this idea of Dear Younger Me, you're writing yourself a letter. You spoke about this a little bit earlier in our interview as you're talking about that 22 or 23-year-old version of yourself where you're thinking, man, you have so much time, you have so much opportunity. You could have done so much more. What's some advice that you would impart on either the younger version of yourself, or maybe if you're coaching someone that's in their early 20s, what are some things that you'd say to that person as you're thinking about being that younger version of yourself?
Yeah. So, how much time do we have is normally my question. So you're right. Age gives you so much perspective that when you're under 30, you never think it will. And I think, most of our parents are probably sitting there rubbing their hands together as they're like, you thought you knew everything when you were a teenager, but you'll find out so much. I remember my parents sitting down and saying to me, you think you have all the answers now, but just wait. And I cringe to say it, but they were 100% right. And I think the biggest advice that I would give my 22-year-old self would be kind of twofold. The first thing would be, I would say, always bet on yourself. I think, just as I said earlier in the podcast, we talk ourselves out of really great ideas all the time by asking, what if this fails? What if this doesn't work? And I think we need to ask ourselves way more often, what if this does work? What if I do succeed at this? What would that look like? And that, to me, kind of is the motivation that we often need to push ourselves forward and really do some magical stuff that when you're under 30, you're really scared to do. I think there's a lot of us that are that I'm not anymore, but we're under 30, that I would have been so scared to do what I'm doing now when I was under 30. And I probably wouldn't have put myself out there as much as I'm willing to now, but there's no reason not to. Just like, past guests have said, every no gets you closer to a yes. Every failure is a lesson that you can learn. These are all important things. I think the other side of this would be get really clear on your process. And so oftentimes when we're young, we just do things for the sake of doing them, which is fun at the time for sure. But I also think, there's so much to be learned from the basics, from process. The example I'll use is my son is playing youth basketball competitively now for the first time this year. And at first when he started playing, he would just throw it from the 3-point line and was missing every shot. And every now and then would get lucky and it would fall in the basket. And we've been working with him all year to say, dribble, get closer to the basket. And he said, but if I don't shoot, I'm not going to make it. And my point was, absolutely. But if you shoot from closer, you're much more likely to make it than just shooting it from like half court because you just want to get the shot off, which is hard to convince an 8-year-old boy of, by the way, or 7-year-old now. But the key is last weekend we were at his game and he's dribbling closer to the basket and he went up for 2 layups and it was perfect process and perfect form. And he came down after the game and he had missed both of them, by the way. And I said, you did so awesome. I'm so proud of you for getting up and doing those layups. And he said, I missed them both. And my point to him was, if you keep doing it just the way you did it, it's eventually going to go in. And I think so often when we're young, we want those quick results and we want to say, I did it perfectly the way people told me to, but I'm not seeing the results. And so we just stop doing it. And, all that to say, if he stops dribbling close to the basket, if he stops taking the shots, he's never going to make it. And he's never going to make the process. And so often when we're young, we abandon things that really just take more time. And so my 2 pieces of advice would be bet on yourself and be willing to play the long game with it.
Wow. It's a great way to end our interview. And I think that for those of you that have not ever heard of Alyssa, you're going to be researching her for sure. And check out our coaching program. I would say that coaching is such a need in sales. If you're an individual producer or if you're a member of a team, coaching is important. And coaching has different layers to it, right? You mentioned that in your coaching program, Compass South, that you've got several different intersection points that you can be a part of. Sometimes you just want to have some group coaching and it's not super intense. As you become more of a high performer, there's some things that you want to share with a coach that are pretty direct and pretty intimate that you may not want to share with a big old group. Masterminding is important and is a topic that we talked about a lot. And so, Alyssa, I really appreciate your involvement in our interview today. For those of you who have been listening to the last couple of episodes, you'll know that Alyssa is joining us as one of our keynote speakers for our 30 Under 30 reunion, which is going to be in a couple of months in Charleston, South Carolina. Wayne Salmons, our last guest, is also going to be one. And then we mentioned Stephanie Lanier several times. All 3 of them are going to be our keynotes. So she is doing this every single day and can help you out. And I just think that you've got a wonderful message that is going to continue to impact and improve the lives of others. So thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be in Charleston and with all of you guys and share some more.
Well, in the way that this podcast grows, for those of you listening, if you would give it a 5-star rating, we would be so honored. Kayla Davis and I spend a lot of time and energy giving you great content, bringing great guests, and it's a way of validating it, but it's also a way of growing it. Share this episode with someone that you know needs to hear it or needs some coaching. Alyssa is a pro. And so I would just say thank you for everybody. We've got, we're close to 20 5-star reviews, and I'm going to be doing some celebrating when we get there. So thank you so much, Alyssa. And as I love to say, for Alyssa Hellman, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.